my friend's band is his band was the opener.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I didn't like I saw him. He was at the merch booth like signing, and I was like, "Hey
sick.
man," I'm like, "Don't I know you? Aren't you a drummer?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm a drummer." And I was like, "Oh, I felt like such a dick afterwards."
Oh, sure, you did that to Elon Rubin?
Yeah, I was like, like 9 Inch Nails and Paramore.
Hey guys, welcome to the 180 Drums podcast. If you don't find that intro funny, you do not get it. You clearly do not know who Elon Rubin is, and maybe that's not your fault, but go check out Elon Rubin, and then you can laugh with me at Kris that he walked up to Elon, who, like I mentioned, is one of my favorite drummers, and he didn't know who he was. Guys, that is a little taste of what's to come. You are listening to the 180 Drums podcast, where we dissect and analyze and hang out with the best drummers and the best people in the industry to teach you lessons about life, about how to learn, and about how to succeed in the music industry and that networking, making friends, making contacts. Now today we're talking with Kris Mazzarisi. Now Kris is not only the creator of Big Fat Snare Drum, but he's also the drummer for LMFAO. He's also the drummer for various other artists, and he is an all-around great guy, an all-around success story. And what's so exciting about the podcast today is that Kris is going to talk about a whole number of different subjects. So the first thing we're going to talk about that you'll hear us get into is Big Fat Snare Drum. We'll talk about some of the origins of that and how the company started. We share a secret in the show notes. If you go to 180drums.com /Big Fat Snare Drum, not only will you get to see the original pictures of the Big Fat Snare Drum, which I'm super excited that Kris gave us exclusively, but also you get to check out several videos that we filmed where we review the Big Fat Snare Drum and we talk about that. So we've got that in the show notes. We also, with Kris today, we're going to cover some of the most surprising moments of his career. We're going to talk about not only, like I mentioned, the start of Big Fat Snare Drum, but the development of it and, where he got the idea, how it progressed, how he built contacts, and how he brought the idea to life and today is working on it and continuing to grow it. Also, we're going to discuss how Kris was a drum tech. Got started in LA drum teching, and that eventually led to the LMFAO gig. He talks a lot about daily improvement and, gives us some life hacks. Kris really lets us in this podcast and shares a whole bunch. So I digress. Before I go any further, we're excited to have you with us today. Please check out 180drums.com /Big Fat Snare Drum and let us know what you think. All right, guys, enjoy the show. Hey guys, welcome Kris to the show. Kris is the owner of Big Fat Snare Drum. This guy is the man. He's such a good dude, and we are hanging out. We just talked for about 40 minutes now prior to actually getting this interview started. But dude, it's so great to have you on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, man?
Well, first, I'm so stoked to be on this. This is the first time I'm on a podcast. I am a huge podcast fan. I listen to comedy podcasts at my shop basically for the entire length of my day. So this is awesome to be on a podcast. So I guess if you want me to start with like the history of Big Fat Snare Drum, would that be cool?
I really do. And let me also say that that you're so welcome to be on this anytime. I mean, you have such great insight, and I want to preface this by letting everybody know that guys, really pay attention to Kris's attitude about everything he does, because he's a hard worker. And he puts in a lot of time, puts in long hours, but he loves what he does. And let that be something that's contagious for you, that it catches you, that if it's a cold, it catches you, and you absorb some of his attitude about life and about philosophy. And Kris approaches everything with a true sense of passion and purpose. So make sure you pick up on that. Don't miss it. And yeah, man, why don't you tell us the origin of Big Fat Snare Drum, and also explain how it was truly born out of some frustration that you experienced personally.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for that beautiful intro. And I can't take all the credit for the hardworking stuff. I guess it's me being half Jewish.
There you go.
I guess that was in my blood. So I thank my mom for the hardworking ethic. And loving what I do.
I love it.
So yeah, so basically, Big Fat Snare Drum was kind of developed out of frustration. I guess I'm a pretty small dude. I guess I'm only like 5'8", but I have a very like short reach from when I play. So I like a very small kit, very low to the ground. I was starting to play drums for the pop band LMFAO, and some of their material required a second snare drum. And I can't play side snares. I stink at it. I always have like that brain fart moment of going from the side snare to like going into the drum kit for fills, and I'll smash my fingers on the hi-hat.
Oh yeah.
Just I'm a spaz with that stuff. So they kind of require that for some of the songs. And it was just a side snare that was tuned down, big and thuddy. And so I actually had my tech set it up every night. And in the very beginning of playing with them, it kind of became my clipboard stand for my notes. I got the LMFAO gig and basically got the Europe tour, and we had zero rehearsal when I got the gig. So I went from just sound checking with the guitar player a couple of times to all of a sudden playing an hour and a half set, and then 3 shows later opening for Madonna. So that side snare became my clipboard stand. And I guess it stayed like that for maybe about 2 weeks, just more of like a mental crutch. I think I stopped using it after that Madonna show and just kind of had it as a mental crutch and would look over every once in a while, not really even seeing my scratchy handwriting, just knowing it was there. It was, made me feel better.
Right.
But anyway, so the songs that required the thuddy snare sound, I started doing the trick that I think everybody's done for probably 30 years, where you take an old drum head, you cut off the metal hoop. So now you have a flat piece of Mylar plastic, put it down on your snare drum. You have that instant change of, high-pitched, high-tuned snare drum down to a big thuddy 70 sounding snare. It was working fine, I started noticing we were playing outdoor gigs. It would, catch the wind, and I had to blow off my drum a couple of times, which is not ideal. It doesn't look pro when your like drum head is blowing up, across the stage.
No, it doesn't. Dude, that's actually great. Let's go into that for 1 second, because
Sure.
I've had a few people ask me, what's the difference between having one of those, just cutting out your own old used head versus having a big fat snare drum. And I've heard a couple people right away go, I can save myself the $20 or $30 by just, doing that. And my reaction is like, no, man, it's a totally different experience, aside from the fact that, it's entirely reusable, and it's got a surface that's a little more conducive. What's your take on that? What separates big fat snare drum from just an old head?
So the first thing, obviously, is the head blowing away in the wind. But I mean, if you're going to be playing indoors, that's definitely not a problem. But the second issue that I started coming across with that is when you just have the cutout. So what happens is, as you're playing in the center of the cutout head, it becomes super worn, and it kind of flails up and out.
Right.
So all of a sudden you have like a bowl-shaped head, and then that you hit it hard enough, or you hit it at a weird angle doing a fill, and it'll just slide right off your snare drum.
Yes, absolutely.
So then I was like, okay, you could start gaff taping it down, which I have, I was having some success with that too. But then it's like, that works fine until you have a song with like a quick transition within the song, or a transition between the next song that's fast. So now you're like peeling off that drum head with tape on it, and pretty much 2 shows in, it's done. It's garbage.
Yeah.
So from there, I was like, well, there's got to be something to increase the longevity of the head and keep it balanced, so it doesn't get that flailing like bowl shape effect. So then I came up with still cutting out old drum heads. I was cutting out like Evans Power Center heads, and I went to Home Depot. And I was walking down the Home Depot aisle, and I found in the shower, I think it's in like the prefab shower section, they were selling rubber by the sheet. This big gray roll of rubber, and I asked the one of the salesmen, what is that for? And the guy said, "Oh, it's for it's basically to put between your sheetrock and the prefab shower, so you don't get any moisture on your sheetrock, and you don't get mold and all that stuff."
Oh
And I was
wow.
like, "Okay, cool. Can you cut me off like a couple of feet of that?" So he did. I took it home. I sat there with a pair of scissors and some Gorilla Glue, and I started making the very beginnings of Big Fat Snare Drum.
Wow.
Figured out the thumb cutout because all our Big Fat Snare Drums have a thumb cutout, so you can actually lift it on and off super easy.
Yes.
So between songs, I've actually had drummers hit me up and say, Big Fat Snare Drum works within the same song. Like if the song goes from, like super poppy to all of a sudden ballady, people tell me they throw it on and off during a song. So the thumb cutout came out even back then in my homemade prototypes. Those prototypes worked. They actually looked horrible. It was such,
Do you have any pictures of these prototypes? I want to see them so bad.
I do. Crazy enough, my dad, for Christmas last year, I bought a beautiful frame and I framed the prototype with
Oh, nice.
a bunch of the early artwork and gave it to my dad for Christmas because my dad helped me write the patent on the Big Fat Snare Drum. So it was like I can't thank him enough for it, but that was like the one thing I could think of that would be rad for his music room at his house.
Oh, amazing.
So so he has actually the first one. I do have a picture of that, and I can send that to you.
Dude, that would be great to add to the show notes. I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
So that's how it all kind of started, and I was just making them for myself. It was just my thing for LMFAO, for like doing studio stuff.
Yeah.
The issue with the first prototype was the rubber was so kind of heavy.
Right.
It choked the drum. It choked the drum a lot. So the decibel difference between, just the snare tuned up and then the Big Fat Snare Drum was pretty noticeable.
Yeah.
It still worked. It was still cool. I actually used it. I also played drums for an artist. His name is Matthew Coma. I play drums, tour manage, and he's actually my younger brother. So we did an entire tour in Europe. We were opening for Ellie Goulding.
Nice.
A 2-month European tour, and I used Big Fat Snare Drum, and it never left my drum. So that the decibels were never an issue. So that prototype literally stayed on my drum for an entire tour.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought it was like, in my head, I thought it was so slick because, when you fly over to Europe, you're trying to take the essentials. You're taking guitars, you're taking, your kick pedal, sticks, stuff like that. And I was like, man, I don't want to carry a snare drum with me. I just don't want to deal with it. It's going to be extra baggage. And once you start getting to the point of like, every guy's got 4 or 5 pieces of luggage, like taking a snare drum could literally cost $350. You know what I mean? So
that's great.
I'm just like, I'll take the Big Fat Snare Drum. I'll throw it in a simple case. We should be fine. And you know what? Like I got there. I play Gretsch drums, and Gretsch had a beautiful, renowned maple kit for me.
Nice.
And the snare drum was probably, the rental company probably neglected the snare drum for quite some time. And you know what? It didn't matter. They're the Big Fat Snare Drum on there. I cranked it up, cranked the bottom head up, got the snare strainer where I wanted it. Done. It sounded fine. It sounded great for the tour.
That's so funny. I've never told you this, but it's funny. I do this now all the time. Anytime I ever go into rehearsal here in Toronto, Canada, where you just, any rehearsal factory anywhere in the world, the drum sets suck and the snare drums suck, and it's usually super neglected, beaten up. It's usually tuned really high just to have people try and make it sound at least feasible, sound like a snare drum. And the only thing that I bring with me, other than potentially cymbals to some of these, is a Big Fat Snare Drum for this exact reason, because I can just throw it on. And this is not a sales pitch. I truly use that, where I just throw it on the snare drum, and then I'll be like, perfect. It sounds good. It sounds at least manageable now, right?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean that's, besides being like not into the side snare, and that's the other reason why I kind of started making them for myself, was that just you not knowing the gig you're going into, like it's a constant. It's a constant, yes. Especially when doing fly dates, rehearsal studios, even rolling into a regular recording studio. I mean, I'm sure too. There's studios you roll into sometimes, and they have $1 million in microphones, and then they haven't changed the drum heads in 6 years. You know, it's like, oh
Yeah.
guys, it's $12. You know, I'm glad you have you know, a ribbon microphone from the 50s that's $800,000 and that sounds incredible, but like the source, you know, has dents in it and it looks like it was through World War II.
Crazy.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Crazy.
that's part of the jam of like why I started making them for myself. And crazy enough, this whole company kind of formed through my buddy Tim. My buddy Tim Pagnotta, he's a producer in LA. He was the singer-songwriter for a band called Sugar Cult, which I was a huge fan of. You know, pop punk band. They played the Warped Tour. They were, you know, massive in the pop punk scene, I guess, in the mid 2000s. He has since become a massive producer. He just did the Walk the Moon record.
Great.
He's done all the Neon Trees records. He's done a million things. And, you know, I was at his studio in LA and he has a great room, a great drum room with like beautiful vintage Ludwig kit, sounds incredible. And you know, he always likes to pick my brain when I'm out there. Like, you know, what do you think of the drums? Like, how do they sound? And I sat behind the kit and I'm like, dude, it's actually insanely fun to play drums in this room. Like, that's how good it sounded in there.
Wow.
And so he's like, well, let me ask you a question. You know, he had an old, I guess, Ludwig Superphonic. And he was saying like, hey, you know, I love having the drum tuned way down, but the problem that I'm having is the tension rods are slipping between takes, and you know, we're having trouble going back and matching the tone of the drum between takes. And I was like, well, dude, simple solution. Just, you know, I'll show you. Like, I'll tune the drum up to like a medium to, you know, tight tension, and then give me like an old drum head. And I took an old drum head for him, cut it out, gaff taped it down to the drum, and he's like, what are you doing? He never saw that trick before. I showed him the trick, and he was like, dude, are you kidding me?
Sick.
Like, he's like, how does that even work? I'm like, Tim, I don't know. It works. I'm like, I've been doing this touring with Matthew Coma. I've been doing this with LMFAO. It just works. And he sat there and told me, he's like, man, you need to do this. You need to figure this out. You need to go home and you need to figure out how you can perfect this and sell this. And I was like, Tim, I don't know how to do this. Okay, you know, great. So the funny thing is going back probably, God, I'm going to say like 4 or 5 years ago, I had this idea of starting a snare drum company. I have a logo and I have everything done for it. I even have a domain, I think, for it.
Oh, cool, man.
It was called Big Ass Snare Drums.
No way.
And it's a donkey like breaking through a snare drum head. Super cool logo.
Sick.
So I told him, I was like, oh, you know, maybe I'll use that instead of a snare drum company. I'll use that for this and call it Big Ass Snare Drums. And he's like, yeah, he's like, that, you know, that could work. So fast forward like a couple of months, I was starting to like shop the idea around to people.
What year was this in, by the way?
Oh God. The conversation with Tim probably happened in, I would say probably late like 2012, maybe.
Okay. So around 3 years ago. Great.
Yeah, somewhere around there, maybe early 2013. And so I had that big ass snare drum name. I'm like, great, I have the name, I have a logo, I'll just start doing it. And you know, at that point, I wound up writing a provisional patent so I could start kind of shopping the thing around and you know, figuring out materials and, you know,
yeah, this is going to be an ignorant question on my part, but you have to have that in the United States in order to sell something. You have to have what's called a provisional patent.
Well, so I'm actually like into patents, I guess, just because of, you know, it's kind of scary here. You have to really protect yourself. So
Right.
I learned like everything I could learn about patents. I read like all these books, like Patents in 24 Hours. So
Wow.
basically, a provisional patent was started by President Clinton. So what it does is it gives you 1 year of protection to kind of shop around your idea or your product and keep yourself protected. It's a very loose patent. Yeah, he kind of put it into place because it's very inexpensive. It's a couple of $100. You get protected, so you could walk into a company and say like, here you go, like here's my idea. You know, sign this non-disclosure agreement and
Don't steal it.
Don't steal it.
Yes.
So he kind of put that into place because in the United States to get a patent, it's a very lengthy process. It takes it takes, expertise usually of a lawyer.
Right. Right.
It's expensive. It's really expensive here. From what I was told, filing a patent, this is considered a utility patent because it's an actual physical product.
Right. Right.
So to get that done in the United States, I heard it's between like $15,000 and $25,000.
Wow.
So so that was really discouraging for people, saying like, oh, I have this idea for like, I don't know, like a new computer mouse. Am I going to go out and spend $20,000 to put a patent on it to show people? Probably not. So Clinton gave this new alternative to spend a couple $100, develop your item, go out, show people, refine it, source products, source potential investors, and then take it from there. And like, you could say, hopefully in that year's time, is it going to work? Cool. Is it not? No, it's not going to work. Unfortunately, Microsoft has a mouse that looks exactly like mine, and
right.
I would be infringing on their patents. Okay, so I lost $300.
Instead of getting sued for
instead of getting sued, and instead of putting like a second mortgage on your house to go take out $20,000 to hire a patent attorney. So that's kind of the route that I went. Went on this provisional patent, got that approved, which took a little bit of time, and then I started shopping it around. And funny enough, the people that I was shopping it to, they dug it, but the first thing I kept hearing was, you really can't have big ass snare drums as your company name or the name of the product, just because you're going to alienate yourself and mom and pop stores. Mom and pop stores are not going to carry it. The bigger box retail stores, like in the States, like Guitar Center or Sam Ash, they're not going to carry it with with that kind of title in it. So once I heard that, I was super bummed. I'm like, I have the artwork. I like the Radis logo.
Oh, right.
So I went back out to LA and I was hanging with my buddy Tim, and we were talking drum stuff, and he was like telling me like, yo, that idea you showed me is so rad. Like, I have bands coming in and using it, and it's been going really well in the studio. And he's like, what's going on with that company, Big Fat Snare Drum?
No way.
And I was like, what? I mean, we were struggling so hard to come up with a name. Like, I was trying everything. And I was like, Tim, Big Fat Snare Drum? He's like, yeah. He's like, that Big Fat Snare Drum thing you were telling me about. And I was like, okay, that's it. Done.
There it is.
That's it. The name was done. And like, I hit up my graphic artist, my good friend Liz. She does all our artwork. And, she was the one who created that logo with me, the big ass snare drum. And I was like, Liz, the company is like, we're finally figuring this out, and just switch the artwork and do this and this and this. And
so cool.
And the actual logo is, I grew up on Long Island and, super close to New York City. And I listened to like, hardcore music growing up and in college and high school. And nice. I mean, our logo is kind of based off of the New York hardcore logo with the X and the N, the NYHC.
Right.
So I was like, Liz, here's the references I want to use. Here's the New York hardcore logo. I want it to be like a badge. Instead of the X, I want drumsticks. And she's like, okay, done. So it kind of went from the donkey logo to the Big Fat Snare Drum logo that we're using, on our social media right now.
Amazing, man. That's so cool. Dude, there are so many things that I want to ask you now out of that. But
go for it, yeah.
But what I think is so cool to note, and I think that you've really alluded to this, and it's cool, is that guys, like, if there's people out there who are listening and they're going, I want to create something, I want to make a product. In a lot of ways, this found you, right? You didn't really go looking to just create something. Truly, you didn't even want to. Your friend, Tim suggested it, and you're like, oh man, I don't know how to do this. I don't know the first thing about it. But it was born. This is the important part: is that it was born out of a frustration, right?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I've always wanted to do something. I've always wanted to start some company. I mean, I've had like ridiculous ideas through the years of like, I'm going to start like a t-shirt company. And, I have a buddy, Marcus, who actually plays bass in the Matthew Coma band that I play in. And he plays keys, super good friend of mine. And we toured for a while. So I actually toured for a while as a drum tech also. And
oh, wow. How long did you do that for?
Oh, God. Probably 4 years.
And what was that experience like, man? Let's unpack that for just a second before we get too sidetracked.
Well, so I drum teched, and I've actually teched for an entire band. I teched for Sarah Bareilles for 4 years.
Get out of here, man.
Yeah, I've done Sarah Bareilles. I've done Matt Carney. I've also done Sugarland. I've done either guitar teching or drum teching. And
How did you get into that? How did you get into doing something like guitar teching?
it was okay. So I moved to LA to start a band with my brother. We were playing a rock band, total like Springsteen, Tom Petty vibe, rock band,
Oh, love
LA.
it.
And living out there, we were playing shows and showcasing and trying to get a deal, and it just, it wasn't happening the way we anticipated. So, my savings started dwindling quickly while living
Yeah.
out in LA. As you can imagine, it's not cheap to live there.
No.
So I actually got hooked up with a job at SIR, which is the big
Yes.
instrument rental rehearsal studio in Los Angeles. And working out there, I've always wanted to learn about live mixing and setting up PAs and setting up lighting. Like my mind is always gravitated towards that stuff, the tinkering with cables and mics and just learning all about that stuff. And
Cool.
so I quickly went from SIR from being a driver, like basically dropping off gear, to then I was working all these gigs. I was working all these live gigs and setting up PA, being an A2, like an assistant on the gigs, setting up the speakers and running the power distros and all the cabling and running front of house and monitor world. And so anyway, started doing that, started getting really involved in that, like absolutely loving my SIR job. I loved working at SIR Hollywood. Actually, I was working so hard at that place. Funny enough, I started off at like a $10 an hour job delivering gear. And at one point I got called into the office of the vice president, and he said to me, he's like, we know you're doing a great job here. He's like, we can't afford to pay you as much as we're paying you. You're making too much money here.
What?
And he looked at the calendar and he told me, he's like, you worked 29 out of the 31 days this month here. He's like, you need to take a day off tomorrow.
Dude, that is so consistent with your character today, man. I love that.
So, I mean, he wasn't pissed at me, but he's like, we honestly can't afford to do that. And
Wow.
so I was like, okay. So he's like, you need to start taking off 2 days a week. And I was like, okay, great. So I took off the next day, and then of course, like, I got a phone call from the guy who did the gigs. Like the following day, we had 2 gigs in the same day, and I was right back to it again.
That's hilarious.
Man. Anyway, while I was working there, Maroon 5 was rehearsing, and they actually were writing, I guess not this last record, the record before. They were writing the record at SIR. And I became friendly with one of their techs, this guy Teal. He was like their champion tech. He took care of everything for those guys. I think he's not with the band anymore, but he was doing everything, when they needed to move from SIR into the studio. He was like the guy who, made sure all the gear was moved from SIR to the studio.
Yes.
Just was like the super champion of the band, and
Awesome.
was like their homie. And anyway, so I remember like just working at SIR and just trying to absorb anything I could. So I kind of made my way into their room one day and was just kind of checking out Matt's drum kit and like oh my God, it looks awesome. And I met Teal, and we were talking for a while, and he's like, yeah, you want to come like hang and help me, when you get a chance. He's like, I have to go through, like all their microphones and the cables and kind of like take off all the gunk, because they've been sitting in storage trunks and in a hot storage closet
Awesome.
for, since they came off the road, and,
Yep.
We got to get ready to get them back. I was like, yeah, of course, man. So I hung out in the room with him, and we were BSing for a couple hours, and he's like, hey man, he's like, you've been in here for a while. Like, I don't want to get you in trouble. And I was like, trouble for what? He's like, aren't you working? I'm like, I clocked out hours ago. I'm like, I'm just in here to learn. Like, I want to learn.
Amazing. That's
So
great.
he was like, are you kidding? I'm like, yeah, man, I just want to like absorb and like, you're like the man, and I want to learn. So anyway, it came time, like Teal called me up, maybe like a few weeks later after we had our first like hang, and, we hung a bunch more times, and we talked in the hall, and, I hung after work a couple of times, and got to see Maroon 5 like rehearse, and it was cool. It was awesome. And he called me up a few weeks later, and he's like, man, he's like, I have this gig for you. It's a front of house gig. And it was like all these 80s like hair bands that he wanted me to go out with. And I'm like, dude, I'm like, I'm just learning front of house right now. I'm not confident enough to go out with these bands. There's no way I can BS them. Like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't feel confident. I wouldn't feel it would be fair to them
Right.
to send me out with them. They would sound awful. They would be. I'm saying to him, I'm saying like in my head, they would just be feedback for the first like 5 songs.
Shoot. Yeah.
So he's like, dude, it pays really well. He's like, it'll be really good for you to get on the road and learn how that all happens. I'm like, Teal, thank you, but I just can't. He's like, fine. Next gig I get, you're taking. I'm like, okay, great.
Wow, that's great, man. You must have built such a great relationship with this guy for him to be so persistent with you.
Oh, he was awesome. Like, he was like, when I actually got the gig, when I got a tech gig, he's like, come over to my house. I'll give you a bunch of tools and I'll get you started. He's
dude,
he gave me like crazy like Peterson guitar tuner and like a bunch of tools, and he's like, go figure it out. You got it.
Amazing.
So he calls me up again like a few weeks later. He's like, man, Sarah Bareilles is looking for a tech for the band. It's like a bunch of TV stuff, and it's like a little trial thing. And
who was playing drums for her at the time?
Josh Day.
Okay, very cool.
Josh Day is the one that Josh's Snare is named after. That's
cool.
That's his model. Well, I guess we could talk about the Josh Day Snare and the Steve's Donut.
Yes,
you too, because that all kind of leads into those topics.
Yes.
So basically, he called me up, told me the Sarah Bareilles gig was happening, and call this number. Like, didn't even tell me any details about it. Didn't give me an option. Call this number. And funny enough, through the SIR connection, I worked a bunch for Sarah delivering pianos, and I knew her production manager just from the SIR stuff, from her rehearsing. And so I called him up. I knew who he was right away. He kind of remembered me. I had a goofy like mohawk haircut back then.
Nice.
So he's like, "You're the mohawk guy that delivers our piano." I'm like, "Yep, that's me, Kevin." So we hit it off and got the gig. Basically teching for her entire band, guitars, bass,
awesome.
Keys, everything. The first gig I did with her was The Tonight Show, Jay Leno.
Come on. And that was your first time on the show, was it?
First time there, and I was teching TV.
Wow, amazing.
I mean, I knew about guitars through the years. My brother plays guitar, and he breaks everything, so I kind of learned how to fix his stuff, and just took my knowledge, and I was like, okay, cool. Like I can figure this out. I can do it. Before the gig started, before rehearsals, I was on like every YouTube channel watching, how to intonate a guitar and how to like change the strings on this and do, and I clearly remember doing the Tonight Show, and I got there super early, got everything ready, tuned all the guitars up. And then they close the doors, they close the main doors, and then they crank the AC. It's like 65 degrees in there once they start getting ready. Because, the lights are so strong. So once they start getting ready for the taping, they crank the AC. And then I pick up the guitars and I start just checking the tuning, and the guitars go crazy because of the temperature change.
Oh, man.
And I didn't know. And I call up my dad, freaking out. I'm like, what is going on? Like, none of the guitars are in tune. He's like, okay, think about what happened. He's like, what's going on there? I'm like, well, they just turned the air conditioning on and it's freezing. And he's like, well, they're wood. They're gonna go crazy.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
So that was kind of the start of my teching. And then,
wow.
It kind of went from like, it was supposed to be a 2 weeks worth of shows. And then, it turned into 4 years.
Dude, well, don't leave us hanging. What did you do in that moment? You just had to retune all the guitars?
Retuned everything and just, let them settle in the new temperature, and then just kept tuning and tuning and tuning, overly obsessing about the tuning,
wow,
all day long. I must have tuned those guitars 100 times because
wow.
I was so nervous, so super freaked out. And, we did that show, and then we left a couple days later, and then she did Kelly and Michael and Rachel Ray and the Today Show and Live from iTunes. It was
awesome.
It was the craziest. I remember it being the craziest boot camp for, teching. I didn't know. Looking back on it, I felt like I didn't know anything.
Huh.
And it just got my butt kicked so hardcore, even from playing drums my entire life. Oh, I know how to tune a drum kit. It's how hard is it? And then you roll in and everything's backline drum kits, and you have to basically start from scratch.
Wow.
Every one of those shows, you have to start from scratch on tuning, and you're
Where
like,
would you start if you had to manage an entire band? So you got keys, you got guitars, you have drums. Where do you begin?
so usually, okay, so it's a really weird phenomenon on tour. I feel like any place you go to, you kind of have to start with the drums first, because any local crew person will immediately gravitate to drums.
Hmm.
It's a
Well, yeah, I guess it's also the first thing that you sound check.
Yeah, but like even like setting up, right? So I would
Wow,
have
interesting.
it's like the craziest thing, and I'm sure your listeners can relate. It's like when you're rolling cases from your truck. I usually I had like the local hands, like, the cases are all marked like stage left, down,
Yeah.
downstage, all that kind of stuff. And I'd have them push the cases into the appropriate location. And right away, like no matter where I went, the local hands would always gravitate towards the drum cases, open the drum cases up, like immediately start pulling out drums, like unpacking like drum stands. Always. It's like, so that's always where I started, was drums. So basically I would get the drum kit completely set up, get that ready, just in place, like not even like completely, feng shuied, like just on the carpet, just out, so nobody would touch it. And then I would kind of start doing the other gear.
Cool.
And funny too, the reverse happens also. It's like, I was always insane when I was a tech. I would never let no knock to local stagehands at all, because most of them do a fantastic job.
Yes.
But I would never let locals touch any of the band's gear.
Smart. It's a great idea.
Because in the very beginning, when I first started teching, I was so slow that just because of time constraints, they would have to help. And it was like clockwork. Something would be broken the next day, every day.
Oh, wow.
A cable would be smashed. A cable would be cut. They would rip apart looms. Drum stands. They always love to take the memory locks off and fold the drum stands down completely flat.
Oh, dude, that is one of my biggest pet peeves.
Every local crew guy or girl loves to do that. They love to like...
You're like, dude, please, just put the stand up. Just put the legs up. That's it.
That's it. So like, I just became this crazy, like psychotic person teching, where I would just try to do it myself always. So,
how did you apply what you learned from teching to business, man?
I guess, the lessons that you can pull from teching is just being prepared, the organization of it, and I think like having the game plan going into venues, because you always get to go in the morning and kind of assess how the gear is going to come in, how your
that's great. The game plan,
how your setup is going to be.
Right, like you didn't just attack it; you had to kind of have a strategy. That's a huge point.
Have a strategy. I think like teching also taught me how to, think quickly on my feet. Stuff goes wrong. I don't care if you bought the gear 5 minutes before the show.
Yeah.
Electronics and microphones, like they figure out ways to break no matter what. And so you have to just think on your feet. And I also think it kind of taught my brain to constantly reassess the situation after the fact. So I would always feel like I'd always take.
Oh, that's cool.
I would always take notes like in my phone or like on set lists to like improve the show, first of all, like improve the flow of the show, and then always improve like the out when you tour, like the loadout and packing up is like the most important thing to a crew. Like obviously local crew guys want to go home as fast as they can.
Yes.
The guys that you work with on tour, they want to be like showered, back on the bus, enjoying a beer, having after show food as quickly as possible.
Yes.
So it's all about the out. So I think like strategizing how to make my pack down as quick as possible definitely got my brain thinking in a different way that I never have. Like just something stupid like stashing cases underneath the risers, or like having guitar cases like open by the last song, and like
Cool.
figuring out like what guitars I could pack away while the show's still going on. Like just every possible thing I can do to just make my job easier and more efficient on the way out. And I think I applied those type of strategies to my business, where I'm constantly reassessing big fat snare drum. I have a mini spiral notebook that I write in on a daily basis.
Love it.
And my favorite thing is to like cross things off the list. Right now, my phone. Let me turn this. Let me get into here. I literally have. I have an iPhone, and I have a notes section that's just Instagram posting ideas. I have my general like personal list of things I need to accomplish. I have just a straight up like big fat snare drum list that's just ideas that I jot down during the day. I have like my big fat snare drum endorsement list. I also distribute Tunafish lug locks, and so I have a list for them too of people that I work with on that. I have like my Home Depot list.
Love it, dude. Yeah.
It's like added to. I'm like, I think I want to try building like some crazy prototype head. I'll write down parts that I'm thinking about grabbing next time.
Now, how do you organize your notes? Because I use Evernote, and I do the same thing. I've got running lists for like, here's what I want to get done with 180. Here's some of the instructors I got to get in touch with about this and that. Or here's my Sunday seat list. Or here's, exact the same type of thing. Here's clothes or things that I have to buy, just daily living. How do you organize it for yourself? Just different notes?
Just different notes. Yeah.
Cool.
And I have like, when I look at my phone, basically the first line of every note is kind of the title.
Gotcha.
What the note is, I even have like notes just about different prototype ideas. I have notes that I keep on file with my, for my manufacturer. I have, just, a whole section of like, my number for FedEx, my number for, UPS, and notes that I have specific for my distributor, whether it's questions or ideas I have with him, or, orders that have, some kind of special thing he wants or special request.
Man, this is amazing. I gotta interject and just say, what's something that you found? Like, if you could, for all the listeners, if you could suggest anything to go, here's a shortcut that's been really helpful for me. What would that be for you? Would it be keeping notes, or is there something else that you really want to share as well?
As far as like starting the business,
as far as like day to day, this has been so like. I get what would be an example, like something that you do that's like kind of like a life hack, if I was to use that term, something where you're like, man, this has been super, super helpful for me.
Well, I would the notes definitely. Like I love, as much as I love my iPhone and typing notes on that, I find it almost more rewarding to do notes handwritten. Like I have a little
very cool.
Small, like let me see the actual size of it. It's a 7x5, like college ruled little notebook. And I write in that, and that goes, no matter where I travel, it goes in my backpack everywhere I go. I jam a pen like in the little spiral rings.
Yes.
And I actually find myself too, this might be really like sort of counterproductive and bizarre, but I find myself, especially when I travel on planes, if it's, did I lose you for a second there?
No, I've still got you.
Oh, my thing went to screensaver.
No, I got you.
So long, my computer went to screensaver.
I just heard someone jamming a key.
It was me. Sorry. This might be counterproductive, but on flights, as long as the flight is smooth, if it's a bumpy flight, I get like nauseous doing this. But if it's a smooth flight, I'll actually take notes from my phone and then handwrite them.
Oh, wow. That is amazing, dude. That is so cool.
It's almost...
we use a different part of our brain when we write, and this is something I've heard a lot of people talk about, that it's incredibly beneficial to write ideas down because you're accessing a different area of your brain that is involved in creativity, is involved in all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, well, it almost goes back to that principle of, when you're in like college or high school, I've always heard that if you're studying for a test, it's really good to study and then take notes while you study.
That's awesome.
Because now, and then like, I think even like saying it out loud too, there's another element to it that locks into your memory. So if you're like reading from your textbook or, your note, like even from your notes from class in like high school or college, if you rewrite them again and then say it as you're writing them, it locks in your brain like a different way than just, typing them into your iPhone.
Oh, that's amazing. Man, I
So,
love stuff like this. One thing that I thought was really cool as well is there's this guy that I know who anytime he's reading a book, he highlights pages. And then what he'll do is on Sundays, he'll pull out all the books that he's been reading because he's got a few different books that he goes through. We'll take out all the books that he reads, look through all the highlighted notes, reread it, and as he's rereading it, he's writing it all down. So it's the same idea of like everything that you go through at some point, your retention level increases and increases. Because your first pass on something, you might remember 10% of it, but by the time you've done the exercise of highlighting it, rewriting it down, rereading it, now you're looking at like 70 to 80% retention.
yeah, I mean, for me, it's actually when because I have this thing where I go to sleep at night. My girlfriend, actually, I guess she's my fiance now.
Nice, congrats, by the way, man. That's awesome.
Thank you very much. She is actually she's my partner in Big Fat Snare Drum too. She does everything with me. She takes care of shipping and stuff, and she does all our books. Thank God she's a CPA. So
there you go.
I have somebody to make sure that as Big Fat Snare Drum increases in sales and we do better, it's somebody that'll keep us compliant so I don't go to jail.
That's great. That's a good thing, man.
But it's an amazing thing. But she goes to bed super early. She gets up for work really early in the morning. So I like to go to bed with her at night, and I find myself working on my phone. So, while I'm sitting there trying to fall asleep, I'm usually jotting notes down on my phone. And then I was saying, I like to go from the phone into the notebook. And while I'm doing that, it's almost like, besides it being, a way to lock it into your brain and retaining the information in a different way, it also kind of becomes like a filtration system for me, where it's like, that might have been a great idea last night. It seems kind of dumb. Or I notice I'm writing it in my notebook and I'm like, wait a minute, I think I've written that down before. Oh yeah, I did. It's like 2 pages back and I still haven't done it. You know what? Let me take care of that today. I'll get that done today. Like I got to order, I have to order like more boxes. It could be something as stupid as that.
Now, just having one notebook like that, how do you keep track of all the different things that you have going on? So in your phone, you mentioned you've got, say it's 7 or 8 lists, which you probably have more, but let's say you have 7 or 8 active running lists, and then you're putting those into your notebook. How do you keep your notebook organized? Because you've only got one notebook you're using, right?
One notebook. My notebook is like the opposite of the rest of my life. My life is like super organized with folders and like, labeled notes, and my notebook is just a mess of writing.
Cool.
Which actually, in a weird way, works because it's such a mess that I constantly look through it, and I'm constantly flipping through the pages and scanning it, and I catch things all the time. Like, that idea, I should go back and re-explore that idea, or I should give that person a call, or I should like check up on that package I sent so and so drummer and see how he's digging it, and it becomes like a different way to check through my list. Actually, I used to work for a marketing company in New York City. I worked for them for a couple of years.
Of course you did. What haven't you done? I love this.
I've done a lot of weird things. I was also.
And was this what year would this have been in? Prior to LA?
Prior to LA, yeah. I was touring as a drummer for a long time, and then the band I was playing with broke up. We lost our record deal. We broke up.
Shoot. And
then I was like, you know what? Let me explore like having like a real like a big boy job. I was a computer tech. I was a computer tech for 7 years. I was an on-site tech. I installed networks and set up computers in people's houses and businesses. I did that for a long time, simultaneously touring. And that company actually went out of business. Kept touring for a while after that, and then that band, as I was saying, folded. Started working for a marketing company. I'm trying to remember the year. I can actually probably find like the folder. I kept my folder from that company, and that might actually give me, probably like the 2007, 2008 time period, somewhere around there. So absolutely love that company. Love working there. I learned so much of what, I knew nothing about marketing at all. Nothing. I have no degree in marketing. I have a degree in computers. one of my friends was like, yeah, they're hiring for like a part-time web guy to kind of come in and help promote some of their some of their contests and client products. You'd be great to come in and just take care of that. So I kind of started as like a glorified intern, and I somehow like figured out what was going on, and I wound up becoming an account manager there. And maybe 6 months.
Wow.
6 months. I kind of was like faking my way through it, and I just did. I kind of absorbed everything. It was kind of intimidating in the beginning because I was a little bit older than everybody working there, which was weird because I wasn't very old at the time. But everybody was like fresh out of college. Everybody had their marketing degrees. They were all throwing around these buzzwords that I had no idea what they were talking about. I would sit in these like conference meetings with all these like 21 and 22-year-old kids that were like super smart and like throwing these buzzwords around. I was taking notes and like looking them up on Google after the meetings because I had no idea.
I love it, dude. I love it.
But at the same time though too, like I was in these meetings with these guys and they were kind of just pulling stuff out of the textbooks and college courses that they took.
Right.
And at this point in my life, I was working in bands and playing in bands and marketing bands for so long, like not even realizing it. I was marketing my bands. I was doing, our MySpace page, and I was doing our graphics and our website, and I was getting people down to shows. And so like I was able to kind of interject and give my ideas and not sound completely stupid. And they were like, oh, okay. But anyway, getting back to what, to the marketing thing, the marketing company is where I started doing this whole notebook thing of writing down these ideas. And I would separate it by my clients. And, basically when the notebook was crossed off, my client was done. That project was done and I would move on to something else. The last step would be to send my client the PowerPoint presentation and all the metrics and pictures and everything about their promotion that they ran with the company. And that was it. So I started this whole notebook thing, and I have the worst handwriting in the world. My parents said I should have been a doctor with this handwriting.
Amazing. I've been told the same thing. I kid you not.
It's a drummer thing, man. I know a lot of drummers that have horrible handwriting.
Do you not feel so proud of yourself when you do write something that looks good?
I do. When I have a nice pen.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it's all about the pen.
It's all about the pen. It's all about stealing hotel pens, I think. Like you
yes.
gotta
for sure.
And steal it. And then that becomes your pen, and then it dies, and then you have to stay at that hotel again. You have to go back to that hotel again to steal another pen.
That's right. Go back to the same hotel. Man, this is so cool. I think what's something that I just want to highlight that I'm realizing and getting out of your experience is that you went through a lot of, not direct failure, but you went through a lot of like learning by failing, right? Like, working for a computer tech company and then watching that company kind of fail and, being a part of bands that failed and lost things, and then making your way to a situation where you probably, I'm imagining in my mind, there was a bit of humility that you had to exercise going from, hey, I'm a marketing guy to, hey, I'm teching at SIR for $10 an hour, right? Like there's a bit of like this, you had this attitude of like, man, I'm just on a journey and I'm loving every minute of every step.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I loved the teching game. Like, I mean, I just learned, it's interesting because it's like when you're looking at stuff from the outside and you kind of imagine the way things work, it's completely different when you're in it.
Right. Yes.
And then it's almost like I almost had to not like censor myself, but I almost had to not be so like harsh, because when I first started teching and I really got into it, and I saw the way like bands professionally tour, where it's like tour bus and semi truck and crew and like, tour manager. I almost was like looking back on, like the way local people tour and local people play. And I was like, oh, that's so unpro, I was almost like prejudiced against it. And then, I mean, since then I've definitely, obviously, I've never like vocalized that to anybody, but I was just like, I definitely have toned that down in my mind for sure. Because there's obviously a million different ways to tour. And, I've done everything from van and trailer tours to, like using our parents' like Nissan Xterra to pull a trailer. So I've been through like all the different levels, and like, you know, whatever works for you works for you. But it's like, it's really funny to, you know, to see like how it really works versus what you think goes on. And it's like, it's just, there's so many things
Yes.
that
Yeah.
happen in a pro touring situation that you can't even like look up online. There's just,
Yeah.
it's
Right.
just, it's like you have to know, like you have to just be in the know and be there. Like you're not going to find it on a website, how to set up like a line array of speakers,
Right. Right.
I mean, I remember last summer, I was teching for Sarah also. And, we had a guy that was flying PA. He was flying the speakers for our shows. Like we were carrying our own system. And, I was like, man, Matt, can I just hang out with you and watch how you fly PA? He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, dude, I want to just like see how this works. And I learned how to fly PA.
Amazing.
So like I was flying PA with him like a couple of weeks later. Like, I was watching him. Then finally he's like, here you go. He's like, here's the controls. Like, I mean, there's a control remote that you use that controls the chain motors. And the chain motors pull the PA up. And then there's like all these different angles you can have the speakers at, and like how the speakers can. And so it's like, that's what I mean about being immersed into that touring world and just learning and like seeing, how it really works from the inside. It's bizarre. It's really bizarre.
Dude, that's so cool, man. There's this, you have that entrepreneurial mindset where everything is a lesson. Everything. I think of Richard Branson, man. And if you guys aren't familiar, anyone listening is not familiar with Richard Branson, he's the owner of Virgin. The dude's got an island called Necker Island. He is, Virgin Mobile, Virgin Atlantic, now Virgin Galactic. Pretty crazy dude, and I'm a big fan. But one thing that's so cool is he talks about being, I think it's 7 was the first time it happened, where his mom took him like a couple kilometers from his house and just dropped him off and said, "Find your way home." Right? And then from a distance, I'm pretty sure from a distance she was watching him, like making sure that he's going to get home. But like your survival instincts kick in. Like, I just have to learn this. I just have to do this. There's no way to, I'm not about to pull up my phone and map how to get home. I just have to figure it out. Right.
Sure.
And then when he was, I think 10 or 11, maybe 12, 13, somewhere in that gap, he got dropped off like 40 kilometers from his home with a bike. And she's like, okay, find your way home now. Your uncle's house is halfway. You can sleep over there, when you get there, and then make the rest of the ride in the morning. Right. Like, talk about having to you just have to learn, right? And I think that probably shaped so much of his business decisions. Now with you, you're like in a situation where you've thrown yourself into, well, I'm just going to learn how to fly a PA. And then little do I know, a couple weeks from now, I'm going to be just given the controls, and it's like, all right, do or die,
Yeah. I mean, well, I want to preface it also, I guess, I probably should have prefaced it before, but he was like, I guess for legal things, I probably shouldn't be saying that, but he was right there, like watching me. It wasn't like he's taking a lunch break and I'm flying PA alone.
Absolutely,
because it's super dangerous. He was like watching every step of what I was doing. But yeah, I mean, yeah, that's just like, that's always been my deal. Like, I'm always fascinated by the strangest things, and I feel like that's helped me start this company and helped me, get it off the ground and get it to where it is right now. It's like, when I first started touring, I kind of approached it like, all right, I want to be the guy who's like the expert, so when it comes time for, my band to, potentially go out where we have a tour bus and a truck, and, like, I it's a weird thing. Like, I always was like, oh, I want to learn everything so I don't get ripped off in the future. That was my thing. So I want to keep people honest, and I want to keep people doing a good job, and I want to keep people happy on the road. So I would talk to everybody when I tour. I would talk to the truck drivers. I would talk to the catering people. I would talk to the bus drivers, and I would always ask like the craziest questions, like, hey, how much does this truck weigh? Like, what's the inside dimensions of a truck? Like,
very cool, man.
Like, how do you use like ratchet straps, and how do you use these load bars, and like, where do you sleep at night? Like, where do you, like, how does it work? Like, show me like where you're, like, how your inside of your truck works, and like on a tour bus, I'm like, how does the generator work? Like, how do you, like, I've been in the back of a tour bus, like where the engine is, and the bus driver was showing me how he changes the belts on the engine.
Dude,
Yeah, so that's
so
just where my
cool.
mind has worked, and I've always been really inquisitive with stuff like that, and just try to absorb as much as I can in the setting that I'm in. So it's been no different from Big Fat Snare Drum. I sourced around for 6 months trying to find a place to manufacture prototypes for me. I mean,
Hmm.
I literally went on every manufacturing website you can find, had phone call after phone call and email, and it was really crazy because you'd call somebody and they're like, "Yeah, we have that kind of material in stock," and no, we can't cut it into a circle, and oh no, we don't.
Interesting.
It was like I can never find somebody to give me an actual prototype. And funny enough, is the company that we use for everything at this point. He was the guy who made our prototypes, and he's the guy who manufactures everything for us. Is in Massachusetts, where our company's based. He's like 25 minutes.
Wow.
He's 25 minutes from our house.
Come on, man.
Yeah, so it's like going back to what I was saying. It's like when I first started working with him, I went there and I had to like ask him how everything works. So like I've
Cool.
seen how Big Fat Snare Drum's manufactured. I've seen like the machines that make it, so I had to know everything about that too. So
Where was that born for you, man? Were you just like at a really young age drove your parents crazy, like just super curious? What was essentially it's just a curiosity. You mentioned it's a little bit of making sure that you want to understand so that someone's not going to rip you off. Was it a bad experience?
it's not really a bad experience. I just like I don't know if the rip me off thing is like
The
super high on
most
the priority
accurate?
list.
Yeah.
But I think I just try to keep people. I think I keep people honest, and I think I like when people are doing a good job,
Hmm.
and they're as prideful in their job as I am.
Great.
So I like to surround myself with people that reciprocate that. So, and I like to know, I like to like have people maximize, and myself too. I like to maximize any opportunity I can, and
Yes.
and constantly try to improve it. So just knowing, like, just as an example, just knowing how like bus drivers operate, and
Right.
making sure like that dude is that guy is stoked on his job, and like he's making sure he's like taking the right breaks at night, so he doesn't fall asleep and crash into a ditch.
Yeah, yeah,
Just like
yeah.
into that dude's head, like, hey man, like even last year we decided to start cooking out. We had a barbecue and a tent, and I would cook, like I would finish my job at night. I would go shower because I'd be disgusting because it was a summertime tour. I would go shower, and then we started barbecuing, just kind of like goofing around. Bought like a $20 grill at Walmart and just started buying hot dogs. And like that progressed into, we bought a tent, we bought a table. Um, my boss, Sarah Bareilles, went out and bought like this crazy Weber portable barbecue. And then we were using the money that we would get to replenish the food on the bus. We were using that to buy ingredients. So now we were like grilling and marinating shrimp and like steaks, and so it like progressed into this crazy cooking thing. And I would make sure, like, I would feed our bus driver every night. I would cook for him every night,
Dude, that's
you know,
amazing.
just to make sure like that dude was like stoked on his job, and like just like knowing what his life is like. And I don't know. It's just my mind is always like just always like having to in a hopefully in a non-intrusive, non-annoying way. I like to just kind of get in there and figure out what's going on. So
Man, amazing. And I think that is such an important quality, man. That's something that as I'm listening to you, I'm getting inspired to think, how can I apply that to my own life? How can I taking tons of notes here, just thinking like this is such a cool quality to truly, I mean, maybe someone's listening right now and they're thinking, I'm not that way. The great part is that we can always reinvent ourselves.
sure.
We live 80% of our lives in the subconscious, right? We only live 20% of our lives consciously. Just some crazy stats about the way that we think and the way we make decisions.
Sure.
So it's like, in that 20% for you, man, in this conscious daily improvement that you're trying to go through, what are some things right now that you're trying to improve that are like, let us in a little maybe on something where you're like, man, this is something right now, personally or relationally or business wise, that I'm really trying to get better at doing.
Well, I have a perfect example for you. So I mean, we're so super blessed. Everything's been amazing. So Big Fat Snare Drum kind of started as like a fun project. Obviously the story that I've been telling, it started off as something that I was making for myself, and then kind of progressed. And like last year, it was totally manageable. It was fine. Like we were doing great last year. Had a great like first 8 months of sales in 2014, and then this year, we got a distributor, and now we're starting to get into retail stores. But with that, it's like the company has expanded so much, and there's only so, the company's just, I actually have never told this publicly before, but the company is just me and my girlfriend. That's it. That's the whole company.
So cool.
And our friend Liz, she does graphics for us when I need them. She's not even a staff, a staff Big Fat Snare Drum employee.
Huh.
So the company's just been us. And we just hired somebody a couple of weeks ago who's helping us in the building process now. And so that was a big step for me because, I'm kind of a perfectionist, and even the way every Big Fat Snare Drum is put together and shipped, and, it was always done by me. It was always touched by my hands. And it took a lot for me to be like, here you go. I'm passing the reins down to you now to help us with this.
Yes.
And it took, I've never had anybody like work for me before, or work with us, I should say. It was a weird transition, and I kind of struggled with it. And it's not like a power hungry thing by any means. It's just like, it
matters so much to you, right?
It matters. Yeah. It's been years and, it's been years and years. And I know that probably sounds crazy to some people because it's literally just like a stupid plastic head, but there was so much work and so much, research and development that went into it, and, figuring out, how to make it for an affordable price and keep it made in the USA and market it and like develop relationships, and basically taking like every like waking moment I have, and putting it towards Big Fat Snare Drum. And now it's like, the product's being passed down to somebody else. And it's, it was a great lesson for me because it was, like learning to trust somebody.
Yeah.
And learning to like pass it along and say like, okay, delegate responsibility. And, it's like at the end of the day, I'm like, I'm this dude's boss now. And, I try to be like, I'm trying to be like super cool. And, thank God he's like awesome. It's this guy, Patrick, that I went up meeting on Craigslist, if you can believe that.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I put an ad up, and it was really funny because, I put the ad up and I was like typing it out, and it sounded so scamish, where it was like, work at home, make your own hours, like, make like, so-and-so per hour, like each unit pays this much. So it was really funny to go in and write that ad. And then I started, meeting people basically on email, and this guy, Patrick, like emailed back, and, like, thank God you have the internet. It's like, I checked his name out right away, and I'm like, this guy's like the raddest jazz drummer. I was like watching his YouTube.
Oh, sick.
He Wells. So we wound up meeting at a Starbucks, and like, I just knew he was the right guy. He was the only person I interviewed. And I was like, this guy he's super cool. Like, he did his research. He knew all about the company.
Wow. Was
like super stoked on it. Great drummer, which definitely won him brownie points.
Yes, no kidding.
And it just, like, everything was just perfect about him. He was really ambitious. He really was like, getting on board with the company at like ground level, and, and just like working it. So that's been a really big challenge for us. Well, for me personally, I guess, delegating responsibility and, having somebody like work with us and take care of like a huge part of our company right now. So that's been challenging. And I guess, like,
what are his main roles right now?
He's assembling all the heads for us.
And does that include, like, does he package everything as well, or
yes,
he's just doing all that? Great.
Yeah, he's doing all that stuff. Yeah, so he's going to package for retail, and I basically told him, I was like, hey man, like, we have as much work for you as you want. Like, there's just
no kidding.
So I'm like, there's new things that are constantly coming in, and so he's been amazing, and it's been saving me, so much time to do other things that were lacking, and I guess great. Another lesson that I had to learn recently too is as we got bigger, is the sense of immediacy, and the sense of like it's okay to pull the plug, and have dinner, and like
Right,
not be
right.
stressed, and like I guess the time management portion of the company.
Yes.
My fiance is like, she's a saint, and she doesn't ever get mad at me when we're doing something and like my phone goes off crazy and I have to answer something. She totally is understanding. It's never
That's
gotten to that
awesome.
point, but I try to like self monitor also, and it's I'm trying to not be as attached to my phone as I was.
Yes, which is
That's
super difficult, man. And what are some things that you do to detach yourself?
um I actually turn all my text messages to non-notification.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
you mentioned that earlier. That's a huge thing. That's amazing.
I check my texts when I check them. My email is not push email, so I have to go in and check my email. That's
Very cool. And like, so do you set aside times in the day, gaps in the day, or is it just kind of whenever?
um. I mean, when I'm, because my girlfriend, she works, well, fiance, she works during the day. So during the day, I'm like a maniac on the phone.
Right.
My phone, my Outlook. I actually had to shut my Outlook off while we were having this conversation because it's like ding, 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 ding.
Yes, yes.
So I had to shut that off.
Just Rich Redmond trying to get a hold of you.
Just Rich Redmond trying to find out when we can get that prototype going, right, Rich?
Dude, Rich is such a good dude. I hope that he's listening to this. If Rich is listening to this, I was just telling well, actually I can't say anything yet, but we just landed a cool thing for 180, and Rich is gonna be a part of that. And I was telling Chris that out of all our instructors, Rich was the guy that was like, no, I'm gonna make sure that I get to have some input on this because he's just on another level, man. He's awesome.
Rich is I think the branding genius in drums right now. The guy
Yeah,
is
I would
like,
agree.
I think very much like us. I don't think the man sleeps ever.
Yes.
I think he's probably has us beat, to be honest.
Yeah, he does.
I don't think that
Totally.
guy sleeps because I follow him on all his social media, and the dude is literally playing arenas with Aldine, and then he's like teaching lessons, and then doing clinics, and then like putting out books. I'm like, dude, how do you sleep?
Man, when we had Rich in at 180, which was just a few weeks ago, from this current podcast, he had a drum clinic the night before in Toronto, and I went and I picked him up from that the evening. We hung out for a little bit that night. I drove him back to our location, which is actually in Grimsby. It's about an hour south of Toronto. Drove him back there. He crashed for like 5.5 hours. I had to go and pick him up. I live like 20 minutes from where we shoot. Had to go pick him up that morning. We go in, we film all day. I drive him straight to his gig, drop him off for sound check. He sound checks, hang out a little bit, and then he's got the gig. And then it's like after that, we hung out again until probably, I don't know, 1 in the morning or whatever. And he gets on a bus and does it all again. It's
Oh,
just
yeah.
like the ability. I felt so wiped after those few days. And it's like this guy does it every day, right? It's to add on the traveling is got to be nuts. But that's a world you're in too, man. All right, all right, all right. Now, I'm sure you did not want us to stop talking right in the middle of that, but listen, I had to break this thing up because we talk for a long time. And currently, although we're talking about Rich, we carry on talking about Rich and how much of a legend he is in part 2 of this. So go check out part 2. Here's a couple takeaways I want you to think about real quick. Where are some areas where you can begin to delegate some tasks out? Find a way to delegate a couple simple areas of your life where you can, invite someone in, like Kris was just talking about, having someone take part in the business and really make a difference. Now, maybe that's someone that's looking to shape a skill in a certain area, someone who's looking to get into graphic design or looking to get into, helping build network contacts for different people or brainstorm. Maybe you've got some friends that would be excited to just sit down with you and offer some marketing ideas about how you could market yourself better as a drummer and, really start to have an impact in the drum community. So I hope you guys are having a blast listening to this and getting a lot out of it. I know that I sure did. And I'm really excited for you guys to check out part 2 where we go even deeper with Kris and, really pick his brain. And I'm really excited for you guys to hear even more about his daily routines and how he really hacks into memorizing and writing down and keeping track of info. So, all right, guys, we will see you in part 2. Please check out 180drums.com/bigfatsnaredrum to get a sneak peek and leave a comment. We want to hear what you guys think of this podcast and how you're enjoying it. All right, guys. See you in part 2.